So the work in the exhibition is comprised of two pieces, and it's several years worth of research, travel, investigating, and thinking through this contemporary narrative of the so-called migration crisis, but also then embedding it in historical context. And this is something I'm quite interested in doing with most of my work. This is typically how I work. And the idea is to look at kind of existing contemporary narratives and embedding them within kind of much longer understanding of history to better understand the conditions that we live in today. And so I basically embarked on a journey that went through the same routes, the same paths that Africans migrants from West Africa in particular were taking to get to Europe. But also very quickly realized how problematic my positioning was. And this idea that I felt like, well, I mean, who am I to tell the story, because it's not my experience. And I from the beginning, was very uncomfortable with kind of being the voice through which people who are going through this harrowing experience are expressing themselves. And I felt very comfortable pointing my camera and interviewing people to, in a way, it felt as exploitative as the media. And this was something that I was very conscious of, the fact that the media narratives are indeed very exploitative. I embarked upon a fascinating text called the Book of Roads and Kingdoms. And this is an 11th century text written by a geographer named al-Bakri. He was an Andalusian Arab geographer from the 11th century. And this was, as far as I know, first comprehensive text describing the landscapes of West Africa, and at that time under the Islamic Empire. And basically the way that this text was written was al-Bakri, who lived in Andalusia, didn't actually travel in this region, but he collected accounts and stories from merchants and traders and travelers and compiled them as a scientific text. And this became a geography book about West Africa and the empires and the cities and, the societies in West Africa. And what really struck me about this text, and not unlike a lot of texts that are written at this time, is that it was very lyrical. So it has this very kind of poetic approach to describing, visuals. But particularly what was striking to me was the fact that a lot of the descriptions of the cities and the villages and the towns often incorporated sexually explicit descriptions of the women that they encountered. And so it became a kind of fascinating lens through which a lot of these travelers are men. And in the description of the geography, they incorporate the description of women's bodies. And I became quite fascinated with how women's bodies and the description of their physical attributes, sometimes quite sexual in nature. In fact, a lot of this text reads quite like a pornographic text. It describes their breasts, it describes their pubic hair, it describes, their curvy bodies. And how that becomes a part of the landscape itself. It becomes inscribed into the geography itself. And I somehow felt like this was not unlike the kind of exploitative nature in which the media describes African migrants in the media narrative today. So I became interested in kind of seeing it through that lens. What does it mean to be the voyeur on the kind of other side of that lens, and to kind of impose that kind of exoticizing, romanticizing, but exploitative narrative of bodies that are vulnerable. Initially, I kind of grappled with the idea of using a camera to photograph this experience. But again, I became really interested in this kind of history of how geography is often used to kind of represent the constructs of a society. I was borrowing a lot from the concept of landscape theory from Japanese avant-garde filmmaker Masao Adachi, the idea that the politics are inscribed into the landscape. So I felt like, well, why don't I use the tools that are used to kind of build these landscapes and these societies? And that was a theodolite. And so a theodolite is basically, if you don't know, is the tool that engineers use, and you see them kind of in the middle of the road today, where they're kind of looking through this lens to measure the level of the land. And so I came across an antique theodolite in Mali, and I bought it, and I started photographing through the theodolite and using this idea of, you know, what are the hierarchies that are embedded in the landscapes. And so through my journey, it was more about telling the story through the landscape itself. I started to document particularly the landscapes that were troubling in this migration narrative. So borders where people get stuck, housing where people stay for, you know, weeks, years at a time before they move on, places where people get captured, conflict zones, you know, etc. And it was through that I began to tell the story of, you know, the situation and the context in which migrants are traveling today, but also how that's embedded in a historical narrative. So you can see that it kind of puts me in a problematic position where I become the voyeur who's looking through the lens. And when you see the work, it's very subtle, but you'll notice in some of the photographs that you see crosshairs in some of the photographs. And that was a particularly troubling thing, because the theodolite, in fact, is a telescopic device. It has a telescopic lens, and it has a crosshair on it because this is what's used to measure. So in a sense, it's also a predecessor to military technologies. But what's troubling about it is I could point it at a, you know, very far distance. You know, I can point it at a body, and I can, in a way, spy, survey, without people knowing that I'm there. So that enabled me to photograph certain conflict zones that I couldn't have access to, but it also put me in this very uncomfortable position of feeling like I was imposing violence on these bodies that don't even know that I'm there. And so it forced me to kind of grapple with this discomfort of that hierarchy and my position of privilege in that situation, but then also understanding, you know, how those hierarchies exist to begin with. So it really became a sort of personal investigation of my position and all of that, but really kind of embedding it in a historical narrative through the technologies that are used to create the conditions which migrants are attempting to leave, but also how that in turn is being narrated in Europe.